Hey guys, Paul here. So today I wanted to posit a question to you guys, and I'm very, very curious to hear your answers on it. So the question is surrounding archetype and card design. Do you want cards to be more open-ended and like archetypes and engines to be more open-ended where they don't really have restrictions, you can use them in a lot of different decks and combine them, mix and match? Or would you prefer a little bit more control and for Konami to rein these things in? So let me explain further. Besides some obvious issues that people have with today's game, like Artifact Scythe or maybe Floodgates, I think that a big thing that comes up in conversations around game balance tends to be the sort of overuse of engines and generic extra deck monsters and pile decks, things like that, right? So we have so many engines in the game today that can just generate you lots of advantage, that can make, entire boss monsters quite easily, and that don't really lock you into any archetype or like sort of summoning condition for the rest of the turn. So a great example, I guess, would be the Adventure Token engine, which everybody knows about this, so I won't spend too much time on it, but this engine is pretty insanely strong. It gets you an Omni Negate as early as your second summon in the turn, so that's a really great way to deter Nibiru. And it also gives you just free monsters to use, monsters that are warm bodies on the board. You can use your Adventure Token engine to link summon any number of things, and also you can even use Wandering Griffin Rider in the process. Plus, you just get to thin your deck. It's very consistent. You even get Draco back, which can be like a free bounce if you're going second, trying to clear a board. So this engine is very good. I've said for a long time that I hate the fact that it is as sort of splashable and generic as it is, because it means that eventually Konami is going to have to hit it, and when they do, people who actually use like the pure Adventure Token deck, they exist, are going to really have it rough, right? Like, if you think about, having to limit Water Enchantress or Rite of Aramesir or something to one, that really sucks for anybody who's actually just trying to play the deck. But there's plenty of others, right? So I think about, say, the Punk engine. Like the Punk archetype is typically used more as an engine than an archetype. It can generate you lots of advantage. It can get you free monsters, get you a free synchro in the process, things like that. There are also engines like the Rose Dragon engine that pops up a lot. Dragon Link in general is kind of a mishmash of like different dragon engines, right? Like, I mean, it sort of had something of a rocket core to it, but nowadays it's really just quick launch and like rocket tracer, and that's sort of it. And give or take. And also, let's see, there's plenty of like small ones too. Ones that have popped up like the Illusion of Chaos engine, right? Where it's just like Illusion of Chaos along with Magician Souls. Chaos searches souls, then puts itself on the bottom of the deck, and then Soul sends it, and then it summons itself, and now you've got like, the ability to get free draws and things. There's so many of these engines, and like, I've only literally just scratched the surface. You guys kind of know if you play Yu-Gi-Oh, there are plenty. And even in some of the more like concentrated archetype decks, like say Despia, they still use like the Edge Imp engine. Or Sword Soul still uses Tinny as an engine. Now, I'm not here to say that all these things are obscenely broken and that they all need to get banned. I'm more so asking, what are your opinions on it? Do you guys think that more archetype cards should involve sort of archetype locking? If you use this card or this effect, it locks you into this archetype for the rest of the turn. I think that that's a really good way to balance cards, but I do think that it comes at the cost of some potential creativity in the game. Because while pile decks can certainly be quite oppressive and sort of greater than the sum of their parts in terms of like the strong boards that they can output, I do think that they speak to Yu-Gi-Oh players' ability to see a lot of different combo lines and different synergies and put them all together and make something that is greater than the sum of its parts. And so it's really cool, and it kind of feels a lot more like what Yu-Gi-Oh was originally build as, right? Like it's kind of your deck. It's the thing that you put together with your own combinations of cards. And I remember when archetypes were first kind of becoming more ubiquitous, I'd argue maybe around like 2012, 13, kind of was when like the wind up and Zector sort of stuff popped up, and like it was more beneficial to run a concentrated archetype deck rather than like a, just set of good cards deck. People didn't like it at first. I remember like, people felt that they wanted more, creativity and originality in their deck building. They don't want to just face an archetype or just play an archetype that sort of guides you along the path and tells you exactly what you can and can't do, and you're limited by the archetype's limitations, and, your strengths are just the archetype strengths. You fast forward to today, and I think that we're just kind of at this middle ground. I mean, obviously there are some really strong solo archetypes like Sword Soul and Despia that are largely self-sufficient, right? But also you've got the pile decks that are just a little bit of everything, and they're really hard to control because it's like, what does Konami hit on a ban list in these situations? Like, you know, hitting lots of different engines can hurt individual decks. I remember the Speedroid example. Having to hit Speedroid Terror Top meant that pure Speedroid deck, at least at the time, was really, you know, hurt and harmed by that. And the same thing goes for like so many things like the Rose Dragon engine, right? When they recently hit that, anybody who was just actually playing a black Rose Dragon, like kind of anime themed deck, sucks. So should all or many archetypes just lock you into the archetype for the turn is kind of what I'm asking here. And I just don't know what the answer is. Like, sometimes I think it's fine the way things are, and I think there's just small little exceptions. Like, even of all the engines that show up in pile decks, I don't have a problem with too many of them, but the things that I do have a problem with tend to just be cards like Crystron Halqifibrax, which leads me to sort of the next part of the conversation, which is, I don't necessarily know that archetypes should just be like unilaterally sort of like you're locked into this archetype all the time, but I think that it would be great to see more card design around, say, like Crystron Halqifibrax should have taken a Crystron tuner. I think most people agree that that would have been a really good balancing mechanism. At first I would have thought, okay, you should only summon a Crystron tuner from your deck, but then I realized people would just take like a single Crystron tuner, and that's what they would summon with Hulk, and it would still be basically the same problem. I mean, at least it would mean it wouldn't be able to get like Jet Synchron and stuff, so maybe that'd be nice. An Effect Veiler so it couldn't lead to Selene. Man, when I think about it, that would have been a better idea. But all I know is like stuff like Crystron Halqifibrax, stuff like Predaplant and Verdant Anaconda, which I know it's banned now, but like that might have been a card that would have really been like balance-wise benefited us for it to be, you know, you have to use a Predaplant monster as one of the materials. Even with like Isolde back in the day, when it was like really heavily abused in Gokis and then later in for Noble Knights, this single card causing so much havoc would have been severely balanced. I wouldn't say nerfed and that not everybody could use it, but balanced a lot by just saying like, hey, you have to use a Noble Knight monster to make this thing. And I mean, I'm saying like one Noble Knight monster. I don't want to take away all creativity from deck building and like, you know, combos. I just think that like it really sucks when stuff like Isolde and Vert and Hulk are so generic that they really aren't even used in their own decks, then eventually find themselves banned, and then their own decks can't use them. Like, there are some people who want Artifact Dagda banned, and I think that that's, like, kind of weird. I mean, I think Dagda's fine as a card. It works well in Artifacts, but I think that maybe Scythe is, like, the better answer there, so that Artifacts don't have to be, like, heavily hit by the idea that Dagda exists and is a generic, like, Link monster to make. So there's, like, always these different ways to solve the problem or address it, and that's if we're even assuming that it is a problem. I mean, some people are totally okay with this. If we had like nothing but archetype restrictions, then we might not get really cool hybrid decks that exist, and this also would maybe heavily affect the lower tier decks as well. So a lot of what I talk about tends to focus on like what the strongest decks are, but it would also suck if you couldn't maybe combine your Blackwing and Raid Raptor decks together. Instead, like they were completely walled off from each other. That might not be too fun. Then again, there's like examples of decks that I think do a really good job of being walled guardians, like Madolche. Basically, with Madolche Petting Cestor, which is sort of their, you know, best starting card, it completely locks you into Madolche monsters for the turn, and Madolche are still a really fun and surprisingly like viable deck to use. So I don't really know. Like and then you have like these weird ones like Dragon Link that aren't even, they're barely even archetypes at all. So like I don't know what you do with that. It's a crazy world. So I don't know. There's just something that I was thinking about, and I wanted to ask you guys, where do you stand on it? What do you think is like the best balance? Like clearly we have these really strong engines that like kind of are overbearing, and they lead to really strong extra deck monsters that are also typically generic. You know, Borreload Savage Dragon isn't asking you for a rocket non-tuner or something. So it's, you know, it's really weird. I don't know. Where do you stand? What do you think? I'd love to hear your opinions down in the comments. Let me know. I'll see you guys in the next one. Pass turn.